Afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul, and I am a nerd, and you are lucky enough to be here with a front row seat to the May 2015 PracticeMaster Virtual User Group meeting, where today we are talking about such exciting topics as Outlook synchronization. Well, I say that first, even though it's second, because the other topic is printer settings. Okay, we don't always have the most exciting, but we do have the most relevant topics. But before I talk about what we're talking about, I had better press this button and show you this so that you can understand that what you're looking at right here on my screen, you should not be seeing on your screen, because this is the GoToWebinar control panel, and you want to use this button that looks like an arrow pointing to the right to slide that right off the side of the screen. Pressing this button, of course, will slide this big GoToWebinar control panel right off the side of your screen. When you do that, the only thing remaining will be these little buttons here, and this one will turn into a button that looks like more like it's pointing to the left, because clicking it again will cause this to slide back onto your screen. Why? Well, because if you're shy and you have a question, this is the place for you. Type your question right here. Remember to hit send. And Leanne, our humble and full, because it's a birthday day and we had pie moderator. Did that go together right? Leanne, our humble moderator, and then put that other thing in between and you've got something funny. She will recognize that you have a question. She will interrupt Mary Jo or myself at just the right time, and she will ask your question for you because she's just that way. Now, sometimes Mary Jo gets off track. Okay, I get off track. And if we do that, or if we're just not understanding the question you're asking, or if our questions beget other questions and you have follow-up questions, just keep typing your questions here. Just keep typing what you want to tell us here. Keep remembering to hit send, and Leanne will keep interrupting us at just the right moment to keep us on track. Now, if you're not feeling shy, there's always this button right here. Maybe twice a year somebody presses it. Maybe once a year somebody's really there when we unmute their microphone, because yes, that's what happens. You raise your hand. That's what this button means. Leanne still recognizes that you have a question. She still interrupts me and Mary Jo at just the right time, but instead of reading your question, she unmutes your microphone and lets you ask your own question. Now, couple rules. No Fritos, no Doritos, no crunchy snacks of any nature, because your microphone will remain unmuted until we are done answering your question. So that means if you have follow-up questions, or if we get off track, or if we just plain didn't understand what you were asking, you're still in an open line of communication with us, and you can just talk to us. Once we're done answering your question, Leanne will mute your microphone back up, and you can go back to eating those delicious salty Fritos. So, a couple things I want to mention. I just said that so like that so that Mary Jo would get all panicky. Version 15.1 and version 15.2, if you have them, well, you better do something about that, because they are being sunsetted. And what does that mean? Well, if we go over here to PracticeMaster, where we belong anyways, and we click Help About, we can tell what version we're on. So if you do that in your software, PracticeMaster tabs, APGL, Trust, doesn't matter which one. Click on Help, click on About, and then look right here, and it'll tell you. And if you see 15.1 or 15.2, that means you are operating on a product that is about to go out of active support. In June, after June, I should say, you won't be able to get support for that product anymore. And that means that it will be hard to get questions answered. It will even be hard for us to get questions answered on your behalf if we need them. And it will become increasingly more difficult for you to get your data up to the current version the longer you wait. So don't put yourself in that position. Get updated. The other thing I want to tell you before we go any further is version 18 is coming out. It's due out sometime before the end of the year. I'm guessing in the third quarter. But they're ready to go as far as a pre-release testing. Now, we don't call it beta anymore, because our betas, Tabs 3 PracticeMaster's betas, are better than most other competing products' final release product. They're stable. We have never had a problem with them. Nobody has ever experienced a problem that's caused a data loss. It's just very stable, but it's a way to get a pre-release look and to actually operate and get your copy pre-release. The only thing they ask is that you provide a little bit of feedback. So if you're interested in doing that, send an email to me, paul.purdue@attorneycomputersystems.com, and we will repeat that address at the end, paul.purdue@attorneycomputersystems.com. Simply tell me you want to be a beta tester or a pre-release tester for version 18, and I will take care of everything else. So now, without any further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Mary Jo, who is going to talk about that exciting topic of printer settings.
I don't know how exciting it is, but it might be helpful because they do get a lot of questions on how do I make this different? How do I change my font? How do I make my settings right for my printer? So we're just going to go review all of those things here for you. So we are in PracticeMaster. We are talking about PracticeMaster printer settings today. So in the Setup tab, we have our print setup right here. And when we get in here, this is where we can make some changes to our fonts. We can make our margins. There's even some advanced printing features that we're going to go through. So the first thing that I get all the time is, how do I change my margins? Now, when we're talking about the printer setup, you have to be aware that whatever printer you select up here, and it should give you the drop down of all of your available printers that you have, it is changing the settings for this printer only. So if you use this printer and Susie down the hall uses another printer, she has to set up her own settings. It's not going to carry forward. It's not going to be for anything but your printer. Now, if Susie prints to your printer, she could get those settings. But if she's using her own printer, she needs to set this up for that. So every printer has its own settings that live with it. So that being said, if we come in here to the page setup, this is where we can change our margins. So these are set quite small. If we wanted to have a half-inch margin all the way across, I can do 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. Our printer offset adjustment is usually used for our checks. You can, bump some things down, but this really, it keeps your 0.5, and maybe you have a certain report you need to bump it down just a little bit for this report. Remember, though, that it will keep those settings until you take them off. So if this is just one time you want to bump it down, be sure to come back in and take those offsets off. But let's say you want to bump it down on top of the 0.5 and you wanted to move it over on top of the 0.5 margin that you have, you could do that. But again, this is usually used when you print checks because that's when you want to have your margins stay the same all the way around, but you want to bump down where that date and where that amount's going to print. So here it is. Under page setup, this is where you can change your margins. You can change it to something bigger or smaller depending on what you're printing, but change it back and have your default when you're finished. On this screen also, we have our font selection mode. It's normally set to automatic, and you can select what font you want that to be. Right now, our base font is Arial. If you want that to be Times New Roman, this is where you can change that by hitting select, changing your font to, we'll just choose Bell M&T. I don't even know what that is, but now my base font is that. Now this is changing it for all reports. Be careful when you're doing this because it's changing it all the way across the board. So I'm going to put it back to my Arial for my basic font. I can also do narrow. This is where I can come in and do, underlines, bold, strike throughs, change my color. But again, it's going to stick and it will be on everything, and the size as well. I can do manual, and I can set up different columns. If I've got a 40 column report, I can change this to be smaller or bigger font. Same thing with any of these other column sizes. You can change these to be different things based on that. But I would say probably 99.9% of the time, most people have this on automatic and they change it here. Now I'm on Arial Narrow. I'm going to put it back to just regular. So I have my Arial regular and then back to normal. So those are your basics. Now we're going to go through these advanced printer settings and what they mean. So the allow variable font sizes and styles. So this is usually checked and turned on if you are using a regular printer, an inkjet or a laser printer. This checkbox is selected. The only reason that you may want to take that off is if you have a dot matrix printer that is just using a mono-spaced font that it can't change back and forth. We want to allow the variables because we could have different font sizes within a report and so on, but on a dot matrix printer we don't have that functionality. You may clear this box. I don't know. I'm sure that there are some of you out there that may still have those old dot matrix printers, and believe me, I know what those are like, but then you may want to clear this box if you're seeing some weird things. The next one is use commas in all numeric fields. That's pretty self-explanatory. If you want commas or if you don't, that can be checked. The allow gray text in lines. Sometimes we have documents or reports that are shaded in certain grays, and you want that to be allowed to come through. Now, if you're saving ink and you don't want that, you can just turn that box off, but that will allow those different gray scale to come through. Printing negative numbers in red, or previewing negative numbers in red. If you're looking at a report that has negative numbers, a lot of times this is in our accounting software as well, or in a tabs report or whatever. You may have some in PracticeMaster that it's showing negative numbers. You might want to preview them in red, but you don't want to print them because you don't even have a color printer. If you do have a color printer and you do want to print those numbers in red, the negative numbers, you can check that box, and that will then print those numbers as well as previewing them. So just depending on what you're doing. The optimized for print to file. This is actually just available for tabs 3 statements, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because I'm doing this for PracticeMaster, but this is usually not turned on for normal printing. This is some other things that it can do, and we'll talk about that when we do our tabs printing. But for PracticeMaster, it's off. It's usually, I don't think I would have any reason to tell you that it would be on because it is a statement feature. The remove formatting when saving to Excel. Now this is a huge one that I think a lot of people misunderstand. They think it's going to strip out all of the headers and footers and make that into a nice pretty Excel document, and I'm sorry to tell you that is not what that is doing. What it is doing is it's going to take out any of the point size changes, the bold, the red italics, the gray, the number formatting, percent signs, things like that. It is not changing where that header is going to print or where certain things are going to come over. It's still going to need cleanup when it gets to Excel. It will be there. I mean, they'll have the header in that, but the columns aren't going to be, I think, what you may expect. So play with that, but that remove formatting, it's not going to change it into just this plain Excel document, so be aware of that. The footer options that you have here. Tabs has the ability in their reports, and PracticeMaster on their reports, to, in the right side footer, put the date and time of when the report was run. And on the left side, you can optionally put the user initials. And so if you don't have the print footer on, you can't print the user's initials in the footer, so that goes hand in hand. You also can print the horizontal ruling line in the footer as well above that. So you can have that option to turn it on and off as to whether or not you want that little footer to print. The font size adjustment can help you bump up the font into a bigger font. Let's say you have a PracticeMaster report and the font is super, super small. You can come in and you can adjust this from, you can do to 150%. I think the minimum is 50%, the maximum is 150. So you can shrink the font or you can increase the font. But be careful, because even if you increase the font to the 150%, it might still be small depending on your column width and the things that you have in your fields in your PracticeMaster reports. But you can try this, and it's going to do it in 10% increments. So, well, if it were 10%, let's say that you had a 10-point font and you increase this to 120%, that's going to increase it to 12 point. So you can kind of go in there and you can adjust that and play with it to see if that will increase the font size enough. If it doesn't, there's a couple of other little things that we can do to try to get that font size bigger, but probably most of the questions I have on that font size is in PracticeMaster because some of those reports have a lot of columns and a lot of information and it prints tiny. The longer and the more space you're taking up across that page, the smaller the font becomes. So it is one thing that you can play with and try. The gray shade density and the gray text line density, these are, again, if you're going to be shading and using the gray text in the lines, you can increase how dark that gray is on there. So that's just another thing that you have on there. Oh, and one more thing on the font size adjustment, I just wanted to mention that is not a zoom feature. Some people think that they're going to zoom that document up, and that is not what that is. It's increasing the font size in the document, so just be aware of that there. If you need to go back to the factory defaults, you can go in and click on the default button. And if you need any help or going in on any of the things that I talked about today, you can hit the help button and it will explain each one of these advanced features in a little more detail than what I've touched on. And you can decide whether that's something that you do or do not need. So I'm just going to leave them in here how they are. And that's it. That's all I really have on the print setup in PracticeMaster, and we will talk about the other programs on another webinar. Paul?
Well, I kid you about it being not exciting, but I have to admit I learned one thing I didn't know before, so I guess it was a little bit exciting. I am going to talk about Outlook synchronization. Now, before I even go in there, I want to caution you and say this isn't something that you just go in and turn on. Because Outlook and PracticeMaster can synchronize, but if you don't think out and plan out what you're going to do, you can have some really disastrous results. For instance, if you've got a mishmash of contacts in your phone, and your phone is syncing with your Outlook, and so those contacts are also in Outlook, and then you turn on contact synchronization, you're going to, if you don't think about what you're doing, you may be bringing those into PracticeMaster and creating a mess. Another thing is calendar. If you've got all sorts of calendar items in your phone or in your Outlook, or both, obviously, then you turn on calendar synchronization, all of a sudden you're going to see Sam's soccer practice at 7 tomorrow, or the whole firm's going to see it. Now, if that's what you want, that's fine. But if you just turn it on and don't give the right amount of planning and the right amount of forethought to the situation, then you have the potential to create a gigantic mess. So with that said, I want you to understand that if you go into utilities, I always go into the wrong place first, maintenance, and then integration, you will find Outlook synchronization, okay? Not to be confused with synchronizing PracticeMaster and tabs and tasks. This is Outlook synchronization. Now, we talk about phones. People want their calendars on their phones. People want contacts on their phones. What's happening is that PracticeMaster is synchronizing with Outlook, and from there it's up to you to take care of synchronizing your Outlook with your phone. We synchronize with Outlook directly, and whatever else is going to synchronize with Outlook, that's done after the fact. So coming in here, just to explain how these things work, you have the ability to synchronize both calendar and contacts. And so we'll start with calendar, and for each of those, you have the ability to go either way. Same thing with, same thing with contacts. So you can say, I just want them to come from PracticeMaster to Outlook, but I don't want anything to come into PracticeMaster from Outlook. Same thing with calendar. So you can also specify with each of these whether it's automatic or manual. So I can say, I want things to just automatically go from PracticeMaster to Outlook, and as long as that's what you've selected, every time you add something in PracticeMaster, it should synchronize right away with your Outlook. If instead you say manual, then what you're saying is, well, I want to run something when I want to synchronize. I may put in 8 appointments, but if I've got it set to manual, they're not going to go over to my Outlook until I run a manual sync. And you'll find that's over on the synchronization options tab. We'll get to that in just a second. So I'm going to set it for automatic, and I'm going to set it for maybe manual coming back in. What that means is I want everything that's done in PracticeMaster to automatically go out to Outlook, but I want to tell it what things I want to bring in from Outlook to PracticeMaster. Okay. Very important to define whether or not you want to allow deletions in PracticeMaster, because as a default it will not. What that means is if you synchronize, you put a trial date in, let's not make it a trial date, that's too important. You put a client meeting in, and that synchronizes to your Outlook, and then you go to Outlook and you delete that, either by mistake or intentionally. If you haven't checked this box here, it's not going to delete the corresponding entry in PracticeMaster. Now, many of my firms consider that to be a good thing. They don't want the attorneys going in and mistakenly deleting dozens or hundreds of entries in one fell swoop and then having them all of a sudden disappear from PracticeMaster as well. So, something to consider. Now, once you've decided that you want to synchronize both events or tasks, and when you're doing tasks, you have the ability to define whether you can want it to sync those without a due date and those that are marked complete. You then must go in and tell it which folder in Outlook you're going to synchronize with. And so when you hit the Select Folder button, it should make a call out to Outlook and present you with a list of folders to select. So when you're syncing events, that's your calendar. And when you're syncing tasks, that's going to be the task list in Outlook. Okay. Now, the reason it lets you go select is because maybe you have multiple calendars in Outlook. Maybe you have one for the firm, one for personal, and you want to sync up with the firm one. So you need to make sure that you've selected the right one. You can't even get out of this screen until you have at least come in here and verified that the one that it's picked as a default is the correct one. So if you haven't come in here, it's not even going to let you out of here. So you need to make sure you go in there and select. Synchronization options, I'm just going to touch on this and say you have the ability to customize what fields display in Outlook. And by doing so, you're able to go in and select which fields are going to show. Now, these are the default. It's going to show the description, the client ID, and the client name. But if you want more stuff to go in there, you simply select the fields. Kind of like what you're doing if you've ever gone into calendar properties in PracticeMaster and defining what is going to show in the description for your calendar items on your calendar. Kind of the same thing. This is how it goes over to Outlook. Date range, we find more and more these days that firms are doing all dates. It's got some good and some bad. It perhaps sometimes is better to say we want the future 99 years. We always want the future synchronized, but we only want the past 2 weeks synchronized. That cuts down on the lag time and the drain on the server when it's doing a synchronization between Outlook and PracticeMaster. It really has a lot to do with how you're set up as to what you're allowing to be deleted, how people are deleting things, whether they're deleting from Outlook or directly from PracticeMaster, and whether or not you want it to always go back, forever in syncing things up.
Hey, Paul, I'm going to just interject here real quick that the #1 reason that people don't see things on their calendar is because they put it in past their future date. And so they say, oh, it didn't go to my calendar, when in reality the date for their sync is only set for, 2 years in advance, and this was a court date that was, 3 years. So
right.
That's something to be aware of.
That's why I say it's important to make sure you have a very high number of years, and all too often people come in here and they go with the default, or they don't understand what they're putting in here. But you may consider shortening the amount of time back that it's going to go. Okay. Now, I'm going to. I haven't selected a folder for events. I have to actually come in here and select calendar and say, okay, I think I canceled out before. I bet it's going to tell me the same thing for tasks because I canceled out. So we'll go ahead and real quickly select tasks and say okay, and go over to contacts. Contacts, you have the same sort of settings. 1-way, 2-way, automatic both ways, manual both ways, or a combination. That's up to you. Think it through. How are you going to do this? How is it going to work? Do you want everybody to put everything in PracticeMaster and just have it go out to Outlook and not pull anything in? That's fine. Do you want it to pull everybody's personal stuff in from Outlook? Some firms do. They want to know when Susan's going to be at the dentist and therefore not available to do something. Others don't. Something to be thought through. You need to select which folder to sync with. Again, it's going to default to contacts. But you may have different contact lists, and if you do, you can select a different one. I did that again. I set it to contacts, but I forgot to hit OK, so I'll do that now to keep myself out of trouble. Field mapping, usually the defaults are fine, but these are the exact fields as they show in Outlook, and these are the exact fields in PracticeMaster, and this is how you define what goes where. And so if you click on one of these, you'll be able to select a different field. Okay. Not usually something that you need to mess with, but this is how you can change what fields map where in the two programs. And then for those advanced users, there's categories. If you're using categories in Outlook and you're wanting to use categories in PracticeMaster, you can have them sync up. Again, you have to understand what you're doing. Maybe you have attorneys and judges and mediators. And so you want attorneys to link with the red category, judges to link with the orange category, and mediators to link with the yellow category. And so you can make it that way so that you can then tell by looking in Outlook what category these people fall into once they get over there. Now, usually you want to sync only the calendar items that are assigned to, or contact items that are assigned to you. And I'm going to bump out of here real quick. And I'm not going to save my changes. And I'm going to go into the contact record. and I'm going to show you what that means. So if I pull up a contact, Mr. Sanders, there is a field in here called, it's at the bottom, thank you, user group. A lot of times we change this to say phone sync because it makes more sense. In this box, you can define whose Outlook this is going to sync with. So if you didn't want it to go to all users and you only wanted this guy to go to Jason, Dan, and Cheryl, you could say that. Oops. And now it'll only sync with Jason, Dan, and Cheryl. So when you're in the Outlook synchronization contact screen, you want to be sure to select you as being the person that you get the contacts for. Since I'm logged in as Ron, it's defaulting to Ron, and what that means is Ron will only get those contacts in his Outlook that have been specifically marked in each individual contact record to go to Ron's phone or to Ron's Outlook. Okay. You can also sync categories, contacts by category, and you can exclude contacts with no category. You can also exclude contacts with no users defined. If you're going to do this, you probably want to do that. Same thing here. If you're going to sync by category, you probably want to exclude those that don't have a category. I'm not going to get into the filter because it's an advanced topic that really applies in only certain circumstances, and I don't want to go there. I'm going to real quickly select this folder so that I don't get into trouble when I try to get off of this screen. I'm going to go over here. Now, let me explain how syncing works as we're looking at this screen. Syncing should happen the minute a change is made, as long as the person who makes the change has rights to that person's exchange, or to their Outlook, I should say, which is controlled by Exchange. So if Sally, the legal assistant, makes a change to Ron's calendar item, but she doesn't have rights to Ron's calendar, it's not going to make that change in Outlook yet. So we have this thing that comes along behind called a periodic sync that can run every 30 minutes, every 60 minutes, every 2 hours. And what that does is it picks up the stuff that got missed. So if Sally makes a change to Ron's calendar item, or let's say adds a calendar item for Ron, but since she doesn't have rights to his calendar in Outlook, it can't make that change directly at that point to his Outlook. Then this sync comes along in the background every 30 minutes as it's defined here and kind of picks up those things that got missed. Now I'm going to go one step further, and I'm going to explain that in Platinum installations, we can install something called the PM Exchange connector that makes sure that that sync runs all the time, even if your computer's not turned on. If you don't have the PM Exchange connector running, which doesn't cost anything extra, it just needs to be installed, and it only works in Platinum. If you don't have that running, whether you have Platinum or not, then the sync is only going to happen when you are logged into your computer and have PracticeMaster and Outlook open. So if Sally adds that entry to Ron's calendar, and Ron isn't here, and his computer isn't on, and therefore his PracticeMaster and Outlook are not open, and Sally doesn't have rights to Ron's Outlook calendar, then Ron's not going to see that entry on his phone if it's syncing with his Outlook. He's not going to see that entry on his phone until later when he gets back into the office and it can do this periodic sync. So it's important to understand. A lot of people have Platinum. They want this synchronization to happen instantaneously, but they don't understand that they need to get somebody to set up the PM Exchange connector to make that happen. It's just something that works in the background. It's a very high level of communication directly between the STI server and the Exchange server, even if it's hosted off-site, that makes sure these things happen and are there all the time, even when Ron's out of the office. And then we define who we're syncing, and Ron would sync to Ron. And we can do a manual sync now by simply clicking this. So if you're set to do manual syncs, you can do them here. And if you need to manually sync, even though you're set to be automatic, you can do it here. And then you can, if you want, and this isn't something to be trifled with, you can run this routine, click this button, and delete all the records from Outlook that have been previously synced. and kind of start fresh. Okay, so that is Outlook synchronization. I'm not going to save these settings. I am instead going to go over here, and I want to show you real quickly. There's this thing called the log, and it's under View, Log Files, Outlook Sync Log. And if you're actually doing synchronizations, you'll actually see these. You might see this pop up every once in a while. Down in the bottom, it might say Outlook Sync Suspended. And then it prompts you to click here to view your log. You'll be able to see the same log information by clicking on that entry down here in your status bar. If you see that, it means something's gone wrong and it's not syncing properly anymore, and you should pay attention to that. I can't tell you how many firms we have where this is set up and they ignore that message until they realize something's wrong, and then they're like, well, why isn't this syncing? Well, why didn't you pay attention to the message? That's what it's there for. And so when you're looking at this, I'm not in a good example, but this log is going to show you. I'm actually going to sneak over to my PracticeMaster, and I'm going to go into the log there. This log is going to show you every synchronization that it's tried to make and the fact that it was successful. So for an advanced user, this is a place to come and see everything that's happening in regard to that synchronization of PracticeMaster and Exchange. But for the user who just is getting this message that says, my sync is messed up, what you want is your most recent sync warnings. And that'll just tell you, oh, this record has been deleted, but we're not allowed to delete things in Outlook, and so it wouldn't delete it from PracticeMaster. That's what it's telling me here. So don't be confounded or dumbfounded by this very overwhelming list of literally hundreds of thousands of sync records. I mean, you could sit here looking at this all day and not understand what's going on. Instead, just press my most recent sync warnings, see what's going on, and if you still don't understand, contact your administrator, contact your IT person, say, hey, my sync's messed up, and I need to get it back on track. So that's a fisheye, bird's eye. I guess bird's eye is the expression. Mary Jo's laughing at me. Please don't laugh at me, Mary Jo. That's my bird's eye view of Outlook synchronization. And that's all I have to say about that. Next month, we're going to talk about the timer. Mary Jo is. It's her favorite thing. So get ready. Get the popcorn. Mary Jo's going to tell you about the timer. And I'm going to tell you about something called process timer records. This is kind of an extension of the timer, but that allows us to create billing entries for things that aren't part of the timer, things like calendar items and tasks and things that have passed, things that have been done, emails that have been journaled, notes that have been taken. Remember, if you want to be a pre-release tester for version 18, just send me an email to paul.purdue, like the school, not the chicken, P-U-R-D-U-E, paul.purdue@attorneycomputersystems.com. I'm going to bop over here real quick just so that you can know how Attorney Computer Systems is spelled, and also so you can see that we have on our website all of our video content. So if you miss a PracticeMaster Virtual User Group meeting, you can just come here and click Videos, click into the PracticeMaster Virtual User Group meeting page, and what you will see is registration information for the next event. You will see information about the most recent events, including videos, except for when it's still in post-production. This is what we're looking at right now, and so naturally we haven't produced this video and put it up on our website, but as we scroll down further, we actually can view the videos from here. So you can see everything, the 3 virtual user group meetings, tabs, PracticeMaster and World Docs, my monthly webinar series called the Coffee Pot Webinars, Mary Jo's eBite video series where she takes very interesting, neat tips and summarizes them in about 3 or 4 minutes. And then our expanded Paul and Mary Jo show, where Mary Jo or I take a very broad topic and go into great detail about it. And remember, with our new redesign of our website, you can come here and search for whatever you'd like to look for, and it will take you directly to content that relates to whatever is of interest to you. So everybody have a good rest of the day. Remember, if you're on version 15.1 or 15.2, get updated before it goes out of support at the end of next month. And a good rest of the week and a good rest of the month, and we will see you next week. Thanks much. Bye-bye.